In the year of Arceus, whenever you are watching this, we have over 1,000 Pokemon to cuddle, catch, or force to fight for our amusement. With 3 whole decades of Pokemon games to pull from, many fans won't be surprised to learn that some Pokemon were planned for earlier games, only to eventually pop up much later on in some form or another. As such, this video is all about those lost and forgotten babies that eventually returned to the forefront and clawed their way out of the development trash heap. Yes, those lucky mons that survived a trip to the dump and were picked up again years later, just like me trying to skateboard again in my 30s. So, welcome back to Cultured X. My name is Nathan Ellensworth, and here are 10 Pokemon born in the wrong generation. Number 10, Ho-Oh. Possibly the most famous example on the list, especially if you grew up in the West. For those outside of Japan, the Pokemon anime actually aired just before the very first games, Pokemon Red and Blue, over here were released in 1998 for the US and early 1999 for the UK. Famously, at the end of the very first episode, called I Choose You, Ash looks up to see the majestic Ho-Oh soaring through the sky. Ho-Oh wouldn't actually appear in the games until Pokemon Gold and Silver, released in 1999 in Japan and 2000 and 2001 for the US and UK respectively. So no matter where you were enjoying those Pokemonsters, Ho-Oh was a preview of something that wouldn't arrive for at least a couple of years. Many think that because of this, Ho-Oh was one of the multitude of Pokemon originally designed for Pokemon Red and Green that was ultimately cut thanks to the storage size of the Game Boy cartridge, when the game's roster was brought down from about 300 to around 150. All of this was done to maintain certain features, such as the ability to nickname your Pokemon. So yes, if you're the sort of person who nicknames every Pokemon, you are the reason that we don't have 300 in the original gen. In fact, we just did a video on the 6-year troubled development of Pokemon Red and Blue, which you can watch now by clicking the button on the screen. Sadly, unlike some of the later entries on this list, there's no official confirmation of this, but considering Game Freak had around 300 Pokemon they were choosing from, it's not really a stretch to think that Ho-Oh was maybe one of those Pokemon, and that's why it was included in the anime, only for it to be cut and then brought back in later on. If anything, its inclusion in the anime might have helped to nudge the developers to bring it back sooner, and we got Ho-Oh in Gold and Silver, whereas we could have got it a couple of generations down the line. We hope to get this one confirmed someday, but for now, the fact that Ho-Oh turns up in the very first episode is a strong indicator that, yeah, maybe it was meant for Red and Green, but unfortunately didn't make it. But they managed to fit it in the next time around. Number 9, Shellos and Gastrodon. Now here's an entry with some concrete information. In a 2007 issue of Nintendo Power magazine, Junichi Masuda and other members of the Game Freak development team gave an interview to promote Pokemon Diamond and Pokemon Pearl. During this interview, Masuda said, "There's also a Sea Slug Pokemon that we weren't able to put in Ruby and Sapphire that we were able to put in this one, Pokemon Diamond and Pearl." So yeah, that definitely sounds like Shellos and Gastrodon. I can't really think of any other Sea Slug Pokemon from Diamond and Pearl. One interesting part of this reveal is that while Sinnoh obviously has an east and west side, it's not drastically different, unlike in Hoenn, where there is a land side and a water side. A marked difference between the sides that would probably actually cause the Pokemon to take on different forms. Gen 3's map is literally split between land and water, and if you had a Pokemon that was in both sides, it would make absolute sense for them to take on 2 different forms. So it really does make sense for Shellos and Gastrodon to maybe be born there. Also, Shellos and Gastrodon are water and ground type, which is a perfect mixture of Kyogre and Groudon's water and ground. As shared by Pokemon researcher Dr. Lava, Pokemon Diamond and Pearl actually contain data pointing to earlier designs for the Sea Slugs, which could easily be holdovers from their first design and planned inclusion in Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire. Who knows why they were kicked from one generation to the next, especially when maybe it makes more sense for them to be in Hoenn, but thankfully they made it in the end because they are so cute. Number 8, Leafeon. The first generation of Pokemon gave us the iconic Eevee and its multitude of evolutions with Jolteon, Vaporeon, and Flareon. With electric, water, and fire all covered with those, there's a good chance you'd think maybe grass would be next. Well, while Pokemon Gold and Silver would ultimately give us the dark and psychic type Pokemon Umbreon and Espeon, actually, there was a grass-type Eevee evolution planned for all the way back in Johto. Back in the 90s, Nintendo used to hold their very own gaming conference called Space World, which was very much like an E3 or a Gamescom. In 1997, at the Nintendo Space World, there was a demo for Pokemon Gold and Silver, and thankfully, footage from the Space World demo has been preserved, including a lot of preliminary designs for Pokemon. This demo has a plethora of Pokemon that never made it to the market, but it does also have so many hints to the future of the series. And one of the main Pokemon included in the Space World demo that didn't make it to market is indeed a grass-type Eevee evolution. Now, considering Gold and Silver very nearly didn't have Kanto in the game, and it was only thanks to the programming magic of Satoru Iwata we got them, yeah, I'm not surprised that a lot of Pokemon got cut. In fact, Gold and Silver only add about 100 Pokemon, which is one of the lowest amounts any generation has ever added. Basically, that Game Boy was struggling. I think they got in as many Pokemon as they could, and they called it a day. So yeah, sorry Leafeon, you didn't make the cut that time, but you did come back in the future, and probably with a cooler mechanic, and we got Glaceon as well, so it all worked out at the end. Now, when do we get that flying type Edu? Number 7, Tyranitar. The mighty Tyranitar would pop up in Pokemon Gold and Silver, but did you know it made an official public appearance well before this? In April of 1997, Pokemon artist Ken Sugimori was interviewed in the magazine Microgroup Game Review. To help promote this interview, Sugimori created some bespoke Pokemon artwork, which would appear on the magazine's cover. While there are many interesting things on display here, including what just might be a proto-Hitmontop, the appearance of Tyranitar is unmistakable, looking fairly similar to the version we would eventually get. However, this version also has something of a resemblance to one of the many kaiju-like creatures Sugimori designed for Pokemon Red and Green that eventually would not make the cut. So there's a very real possibility that Tyranitar was actually one of the Godzilla-like creatures involved in the original Pokemon pitch, but it didn't make it to market. Maybe because there was too many ones that already looked like that, maybe because of Rhydon or whatever, but yeah, it's not hard to believe that Tyranitar was actually always planned to be in there. While it's all speculation, one thing that makes this feel slightly more possible is that alongside many of the kaiju-like Godzilla-esque designs that were included in the original Pokemon pitch document, there was also a pre-evolution for one of those Godzilla-type Pokemon, and that looks quite a bit like Larvitar. So where did that pre-evolution go? Well, if you ask me, that pre-evolution looks a lot like the substitute Pokemon that pops up when Pokemon use that move. Now this is all loose, this could be anything, but there is absolutely a world where Tyranitar and Larvitar in this early Godzilla-esque form were definitely meant to be in Red and Green. And not only that, but the substitute was based on one of them. But while we don't know if any of this is true, we do know that Tyranitar's design harkens all the way back to 1997. So yeah, there's a good chance he got the cut from Red and Green, but came back as soon as he could afterwards. Number 6, Sirfetch'd. The humble Farfetch'd may just be one of the most forgotten Pokemon in Pokemon Red and Blue. As well, it has a fun gimmick, the stats and design hardly screamed to be included on everyone's competitive team. So it's comforting to know that Game Freak were considering expanding on this evolution line very early on, as the 1997 Space World demo includes a concept for a Farfetch'd evolution that the world would never see. This one-like Pokemon seems to be holding a leek and has some sort of masquerade mask over its face, a drastically different design from what would eventually arrive with Sirfetch'd. In fact, this is one entry where while the idea of a Farfetch'd evolution was eventually fulfilled, this one has been wholeheartedly debunked. In a 2019 interview with Eurogamer, Junichi Masuda and Shigeru Omori were asked about Sirfetch'd and if this fabled lost Pokemon from the old Gold and Silver Space War demo informed its design. Omori answered, laughing, "It's a completely new design. Really, when we're looking at the UK as a region, we thought this kind of evolution with it holding its leek like a sword and having a kind of shield design really fits with this new region we were designing." So yeah, while this older design was sadly lost to time, we're just happy Farfetch'd eventually got some love. And honestly, personally speaking, I think Sirfetch'd does a much better design anyway. Number 5, Gogoat. Years before he was galloping around Lumiose City, the mighty Gogoat may have just been planned for Pokemon Black and White, if early designs are to be believed. According to research done by both Dr. Lava and Bulbapedia, early concept work for Pokemon Black and White shows a Pokemon that is very distinctly a grass-type goat, with branches replacing the creature's horns. This particular design can be interpreted a number of ways, as many online think that this early concept was in fact a draft of Sawsbuck, but this was ultimately shifted when Pokemon Black and White added the Seasons mechanic, and so this design was dropped in favour of a deer with multiple different forms. Without any official confirmation, it's hard to say definitively, but in our opinion, this early design is clearly a grass goat, and the fact that we actually got a grass goat in the very next generation is almost certainly not a coincidence. Let's just be thankful that they took a couple more swings at the design, as that admittedly crude early draft doesn't quite have the charm that Gogoat does. Number 4, Mime Jr. Quite often, Pokemon are designed around a new gimmick introduced in the latest games, and for Pokemon Gold and Silver, that big gimmick was breeding. Because of this, the second gen introduces quite a lot of baby Pokemon, including the cute and cuddly creatures such as Pichu, Elekid, Magby, and Cleffa. But this is just a small portion of the almost army of babies we nearly received. This swarm of babies is another set of Pokemon that were introduced in the 1997 Space World demo. And one of the most interesting is this early concept for Mime Jr. that looks like a little egg with limbs. It's not clear why certain baby Pokemon were scrapped, but the original Mime Jr. was one of the many to get eliminated, like Pokemon's very own Order 66. Game Freak's lightsaber also thwarted the prospects of pre-evolutions for Grimer, Growlithe, Ponyta, Meowth, Doduo, and Chansey. While Generation 3 feels quite separate to other regions, Generation 4 sees additions to lots of previous Pokemon's evolution line, with Sinnoh giving us plenty of new evolutions and new babies for the first time in a while. This is how we eventually got the adorable Mime Jr. as well as Happiny and Munchlax. But while Happiny looks very, very little like its original concept, it's fun that Mime Jr. does retain some of the qualities of the little egg jester version, including quite a distinctive pose. I like them both, but honestly I quite like the fun little jester egg that we nearly got. Number 3, Sharpedo. Given the prominence of sharks in pop culture and the monster-focused assortment of creatures we received in Pokemon Red and Green, it's actually somewhat of a surprise it took 3 whole generations to get a Pokemon based on a shark with Sharpedo. After all, the first gen gave us magnets and a mime. Was a shark really that much of a stretch? Unsurprisingly, the Game Freak team had actually been trying to create a shark Pokemon since the very beginning, as some original design documents reveal. Though clearly this messy draft never came to fruition. However, Game Freak tried again very shortly afterwards. Another Pokemon pulled from the infamous Space World demo is one dubbed Ikari, a half-shark with an anchor for a back end. No, this isn't some sort of Damien Hirst performance piece. This Pokemon was once planned for Pokemon Gold and Silver, and fans even speculate it may have appeared in one particular location. One theory shared by popular Pokemon researcher Dr. Lava as well as others is that the katakana for Ikari, which is the name for the shark used in the demo, roughly translates as both anchor and rage. So perhaps this furious little shark was meant to be found where we eventually find the infamous Red Gyarados over at Lake Rage. Either way, Ikari didn't make the cut, but many speculate that this half-shark design was the inspiration for what would eventually become Sharpedo. The half-shark design, as well as the fact that they both combine with an object, that being an anchor or a torpedo, do make me think that there is a connection between these two. And I gotta say, with this one, I think the first design wins. Look, Sharpedo's cool, it's got a cool mega. That shark with an anchor? I'm sorry, that's amazing. Please bring that back or make it a regional form. That's one of my favorite scrap Pokemon I've ever seen. Number 2, Tirtouga. Now, here's one you may have actually spotted earlier. Previously, we mentioned the early appearance of Tyranitar on the cover of Microgroup Game Review magazine. Say that a few times. Well, nestled alongside the custom Ken Sugimura artwork, that early version of Tyranitar, a heinous concept for Hitmontop, was something that actually really resembles Tirtouga. Keep in mind, this is from 1997. Yeah, there's very little surprise that a turtle Pokemon back then looks like a turtle Pokemon of the future, but I do think there's actually quite a lot about the designs that's very similar. While this early design clearly has feet, which would make it more of a tortoise, and Tirtouga eventually ended up with flippers, which makes it more of a turtle. However, the design of the face is quite similar, as well as the design around the eyes or the eyebrows and the sort of dark pattern. I think they share quite a similar face. Adding onto this, well, they have a very different color palette, with the early design being more green or sort of turquoisey and Tirtouga being much darker. Look at shiny Tirtouga. You're telling me there's not a similarity there? I think that is a nice little breadcrumb, a nice little hint to the fact that this actually is picking up the design that Ken Sugimura made in 1997 all the way back for that magazine cover. Honestly, if Caracosta had that colorway and was on all fours, I think it would look so much like this early design. Like a few others, there's no official word on this one, it's just fun speculation, but I do think there's too much here to call it a coincidence. Number 1, Ultra Beasts. Finally, onto the most recent revelation on this list. The delightful and tropical adventures Pokemon Sun and Moon introduced not just many new Pokemon, but a strange new kind of monster altogether. The Ultra Beasts come from a completely different dimension and have strange or outright scary designs meant to push the boundaries of what a Pokemon can be. And it turns out that is for a very good reason. In February of 2026, Pokemon designer and previous Game Freak staffer Yusuke Omura tweeted, "Ultra Beasts were directed by me in a way that recalled all the designs I'd been NG'd by Sugimori-san on up until then, flipping those reasons around and using them to my advantage instead. So there's also this aspect where it's like a collective embodiment of my grudges, which makes it kind of scary. Not that I hate Sugimori-san at all though. going to assume NG'd here means no-go'd. These were Pokemon that were cancelled. And the Ultra Beasts were Pokemon that were picked up from the cancellation bin, sharpened their edges or given them some claws and scary designs, and brought back in a much more fierce form. So perhaps more explicitly than any other Pokemon, the Ultra Beasts are confirmed to be Pokemon that have been pulled out of the development trash pile and both honed and exaggerated to create something fueled by scorn. Learning this bit of context does make the gnarled and aggressive designs of the alien Ultra Beasts make a bit more sense, and it's fun to think which early Pokemon drafts they may have been based on. Perhaps the theory about Guzzlord being a corrupted Zygarde makes a bit more sense now if designer James Turner was directed to make Guzzlord from earlier rejected designs that would eventually become Zygarde. But that is just rampant speculation. There we have it. That is our list of 10 Pokemon, and a few more thrown in for good measure that were cut but eventually clawed their way back into the Pokemon roster. With so many other stories out there, are there any particular Pokemon we missed that you want to hear about? And do you have any ideas for future videos you would like to see on the channel? If so, drop us a comment below and I will get back to you. Right, thank you for watching all the way to the end. Be sure to hit like and subscribe to help us get in front of all the Pokemon fans everywhere, and we'll see you in the next video.